Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be showing a game that I played with the black pieces. My opponent, he opens d4, the queen is pawn opening, and I go knight to f6, the Indian game. He goes knight to f3, just the knight's variation, and I play e6. He goes c4, and I play d5, we transpose into the queen's gambit declined, and he goes knight to c3. This is the three knights variation of the queen's gambit declined. And here I play bishop to e7. And this is all pretty standard. I'm getting ready to castle. He plays bishop to f4. He goes for the Harwitz attack of the queen's gambit declined. And in this position, I just castled as planned. He plays e3, so you develop the bishop, and then you play e3 to open your other bishop. Pretty standard, and I go c5. So in this position, white has, a couple ideas. You can capture this pawn, you can capture this pawn, right? If you capture on d5, then knight captures on d5. If knight captures on d5 and queen captures on d5, now my queen is in a centralized location. Your bishop can no longer come to c4. and nothing can actually kick this queen away from the centralized square right now. So, yeah, if you play something now like d captures on c5, queen captures on c5, the rook is coming into the game, and your king is wide open. You're still not castled yet. This is a good position for black. The other move that white can play, d captures on c5. This is, again, really standard. This forces the bishop to capture on c5. So I have essentially wasted a tempo moving my bishop twice to get it to the destination of c5. And white plays queen to d2. I don't really understand this queen to d2. It's pretty good. It's like not losing at all for white. I just don't understand why he played it because of what happens next. I go knight to c6, just continuing my development. And he plays c captures on d5. And after knight captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and the queens are exchanged. Now this is the position we have where my knight is on c6. However, if white, instead of playing this queen to d2 move, he should have just went for c captures on d5 immediately. And after knight captures, and again the queens are traded off. Now I don't have this knight on c6, so I'm basically down one tempo. But the way he played it, I was able to get my knight to c6 and be in the exact same position. So, he kind of messed up there because he didn't know what he wanted to do before he played his moves, which is always bad. White played a3 in this position, I guess preventing bishop to b4 check, or even knight to b4. And then knight to c2, which forks the king and the rook. Here, he has some problems because his king is uncastled. He still has to develop this bishop, somewhere. And I want to, although my d pawn is isolated, I want to push it and get rid of it. If I push it, though, he can just push e4. So first, I play rook to e8. Now, if I push the pawn and he plays e4, my rook can now capture. He goes bishop to e2, and bishop to e2 this is an inaccuracy to say the least, because he will run into a lot of problems. Better would probably just be bishop b5, and then put pressure on the knight. You could probably also just castle queenside right here. However, castling queenside is a hard decision to make because the king is so open. There's no pawns in the c or d file for him, and if you put your king on the c file, this is actually opened. So it's a hard move to find. He plays bishop to e2, and I go d4 like planned. So now you can't really play e4 again. Castling in this position is probably one of the best moves you have, just getting out of trouble quickly. But he plays e captures on d4. And now this bishop is under attack and it's pinned. The white can never castle anymore. because then the bishop will just be hanging. I go knight captures on d4, threatening the bishop, so this is kind of forced. Knight captures on d4, and bishop captures on d4, threatening this pawn. Again, you can no longer castle because now your bishop is on e2. And that was actually the inspiration for this new kind of idea that I'm having for the channel. It's the meme of the video. So the meme of the video is going to be a Gru meme. First, I will push my pawns to grab control of the center, as he did with the Queen's Gambit decline. Then I will develop all my pieces, again, as he did. Then I won't have time to castle my king to safety. And Gru realizes that this is not actually a good plan, and it ultimately leads to his downfall. If you guys are confused, my opponent here is Gru, and he is confused as well. So in this position, as I attack his b2 pawn, and his king is still in the center, uncastled, he plays rook to b1. Rook to b1 is not good. It does not accomplish anything, because this pawn was going to fall unless you wanted to play rook to a2, and rook to a2 is too slow. Your rook is on a2. It's just in this weird isolated corner. But after rook to b1, bishop to f5, this attacks the rook, and now there's no way to defend this pawn. Yeah, so in this position, he played rook to d1 to get it out of trouble, but I just captured the pawn. He played bishop to e3. Now he's blocking this so he can castle and his bishop won't be unguarded. But I don't really care. I just play bishop to a3. I mean, bishop captures on a3. Now I have these two passed pawns. And what I'm thinking is I really only need one. I just need one passed pawn and I will win the game. So after I capture here, white finally castles, but it's too little too late. I play b6. I want to mobilize this rook without letting this pawn fall. Probably better was just a5 immediately and just getting ready to push this pawn all the way. I did not opt for that. I played b6, which is a fine move. He plays bishop to f3 going after my rook, and I play rook a to d1, offering him a trade. He plays rook to a1 going after my bishop, and now I play bishop to c5. Bishop to c5 it blunders this pawn, but it's not really a blunder because it lets me trade off these bishops, and even after rook captures on a7, this passed pawn is extremely strong. If rook ever tries to go to c7, I would just play rook to c8 myself. I go c4 in this position, pushing my passed pawn, and he plays g4. G4 is fine. It just, I guess it dislodges my bishop temporarily. I played bishop to g6, and he played h4. Oops. He played h4, probably going for h5 to further harass my bishop. I played c3, just continuing, and he played g5. And g5 is weird, because why did you just play h4 when you didn't need h4 to prepare g5? You could have just played it immediately if you really wanted to. Probably something better is just maybe bishop to c6 attacking this rook, and after something like, I don't know, rook to e5 to go to c5. Now you can play h5 and it'll be a more comfortable position for you. However, he played g5, and the best move for me actually in this position is to go c2 immediately. Unfortunately, that's not what I played. I played rook to d3. Rook to d3 is it's still winning, but it's just a slower victory. He plays h5, and after h5, I could just probably capture this bishop, but instead I played. Oh, sorry, he didn't play h5. He played bishop to c6, going after this rook, and then I double upped on the d file. h5 comes later. Sorry, guys. He played king to g2. King to g2 is way too slow, and again, I should have pushed c2 here. C2 is easily the best move, but instead I played h6. I knew this game was winning, and that the only way I could lose this game is if, something like this back rank issue, basically. If say the rooks got traded off and he played rook to a8, that's the only way I would lose this game. So I just wanted to make room on the king side. So I wanted to make room for my king to not have back rank issues. And I was okay with playing slightly less accurate and precisely for just to guarantee that I wouldn't blunder the game away. He played f4. And again, c2 is the best, but I don't want any, future troubles here, so I just capture. And after h captures on g5, now I play c2. And there's no more defenses for white. Rook to d1 is coming. And if you go something like rook to c1, then rook d1 comes immediately. You cannot capture because the bishop is guarding it. You can play something like rook a to a1, but after rook a to d2 and something like king f3, you can now capture this. After captures, the rook is again coming to d1, and now you're forced to give up the exchange. A rook for a pawn, there's no way to play this. But he didn't go for rook to f1. Instead, he just played f5. And after f5, I could play rook to d1 immediately, even rook to d2 to d1. But I went for this capture, which is also completely winning. He played bishop to b5, going after my rook. And here I played, well, again, I can play, this is probably okay, rook to d1. It's definitely winning. But I played the prettiest move, which was bishop to h3. My rook is under attack. However, I have this nice skewer right here. It's an interesting tactic. He goes king to g1, and now finally I played rook to d1. And it was in this position that my opponent resigned the game. Well, it's really obviously why he resigned. The rook is pinned, so if you don't capture this rook, I will capture your rook. And if you do capture this rook, now the pawn's getting promoted. Also, if you don't capture this rook and you play something like rook to a1, bishop captures on f1 is here, and you ignore this rook. Now the rook is now confused, and there's nothing to do. But after rook to d1, my opponent resigned the game, and yeah, this is I actually really like to learn the Queen's Gambit decline and play it. It's kind of just interesting. It's like a pretty closed position, but in the Queen's Gambit decline, black usually gets to push. Let me show you. Black usually gets to push c5, and c5 is one of my favorite moves to play because, well, I'm really bad at I like it when the c file is open, and I like putting my knight behind this pawn. So that's why I opt for the Queen's Gambit declined, and that's actually why I don't play like the Nimzo Indian or anything like that, or the King's Indian, I mean, because I like to keep my bishop along this diagonal so I can push c5. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.